Folks, friends, today we've got one of my very best friends, someone I'm in touch with more than anyone outside of Stu. We've been through many things together. We met on Warp Tour in 2005 and
Mm.
then never stopped texting each other pretty much.
Yeah, I
Um,
kept in touch
yeah, it's
forever.
pretty crazy. We've been to each other's weddings, we performed
Mm.
together. He's one of the most talented people I've ever met and known.
Ooh.
He pretty much plays every instrument known to man and pretty darn well. He pretty much is like, I want to learn this instrument. Okay, I'm just going to teach myself. He is the lead singer of Fall Out Boy,
Yeah.
songwriter, producer, and composer, Patrick Stump.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yes.
How's it going?
Also, he sings our theme song. I don't
Yeah,
know if you knew that.
That's
Yes,
right. Thank you for that.
yes.
anytime.
Oh, that's the song
He
that's
said
sweeping
anytime.
the nation. And we're not going to do a special acoustic version of it now. An
Live.
unplugged performance for the
Right.
sound the alarm acoustic.
Yes.
Patrick, we're very excited because we at Family Guy have gotten the chance to get to know you better over the last few years. You've done some great singing and voices for us, so we
Yes.
we really appreciate that. And so, of course, you kind of had to be here with the JC connection and the Family Guy connection. It's sort of like you had no choice. So we appreciate you, succumbing to the Borg in that way.
Couldn't be happier to be assimilated.
Yes,
That's
that's
awesome.
that's the word I was looking for that I could not find. Is Family Guy the realest job you've ever had? The
Um,
closest to a real job?
the scoring stuff.
Oh, that's a real job.
I would say
I
the
don't mean to
scoring stuff.
denigrate musicians
No,
not a
no,
real
no,
job.
no,
I
no.
just mean that like most people would be like, that's fun, and not and Family Guy is like, that's kind of fun too. I mean, have you had a non-fun job?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well. I mean, yes, but Borders. I used to work at Borders.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my
I
God,
had
when?
when I was, let's see, I was probably about 18, 17, 18. So there was a period there where I worked at, I just went from like business to business, retail business that was on the outs. And we only know that now, like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so I worked at a Sam Goody and then
Oh
I
my
worked
God.
at a Borders,
Nice.
and so, who was that one guy that they would add him to a lot of the sitcoms in the 80s, and like it was always like
Ted McGinley.
yeah, he would show up and I'd be like, ooh, yeah, I think we're done here.
How
That
did
was
you
kind of
know
me
that?
with retail
Wait.
jobs, I guess.
How
So
did you know that? That's
Because
great.
when you say there's a guy who used to show up in a lot of sitcoms in the 80s, that's Ted McGinley.
and he would get added to the cast, but like last season, and then it
Yes.
would be, it was kind of like him or a little kid, and you're like, oh no.
Yeah, this show is over.
Oh, this is getting rescheduled to a later time slot, isn't it?
All right, so you worked at Borders now, but let's go back before that because it's funny. Like we seem to have a lot of guests that grew up in the Chicago area.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
So you are from Willamette.
I'm from Glenview, actually.
This
which
always
borders Wilmette.
happens too.
And
This always-
it's important. It's an important distinction because I mean, Wilmette is a very nice area, and Glenview's like not almost as nice an area. So very different.
So Willamette people would not be excited to be associated with Glenview.
Oh, I'm teasing. Now they're basically indistinguishable. And actually, Pete, our bass player, is from Wilmette. And I said that one time in an interview, like, "Oh yeah, no, actually, I'm from Glenview." And he's like, "Oh, the slums of Glenview over here."
Right. No, and you grew up, from what I read again, but I also read Willamette, so who the hell knows if any of this is right? But your dad is or was a musical guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was a folk singer, and it was weird because he was a folk singer, but then he also had this period in the 70s where he went through he got into like fusion jazz. So it was kind of like, I don't know, like that weird period of like where Joni Mitchell had like Jaco Pastorius playing with her and that kind of stuff. It was like he would do that kind of stuff. So like he kind of had like two flavors, and it was like folk and blues and fusion jazz, which is like real out there, So
Yeah.
so right out of the gate, as a little kid, I knew my dad's music was different than my friend's dad's music. You go to your friend's parents' house and they'd have their Led Zeppelin records or whatever. And my dad had those, but he also had a lot of, Eddie Harris and Mississippi John Hurt and stuff. He had like kind of interesting records, so.
Was he trying to guide you to music, or did you just pick it up? Because I wonder with my kids, I try to encourage them, and they hate that.
do they? What do you encourage them in? What are they?
I play guitar,
Mhm.
and I'm kind of like, hey, you want to sit down at the piano, or can we? But I don't really know how to teach someone else how to do it. But also, they see me do it, and they're not interested.
Yeah, I always just I remember when I was a kid that if I had access to a thing and I was interested in it, I would do it. So I tried to, with my kids, I try to have stuff around. So I'm like, it was very important to me that there's a piano in the house. Whether or not anyone's playing piano, just the idea, because I remember being a little kid and being like, if I had a piano, I would play it right now. I remember thinking that specifically,
Right,
and I didn't, we didn't have access to one. So my brother had.
I mean, you weren't in Willamette, you know what I mean?
Yeah, we only
pianos
had
growing
Glenview money,
trees
We
there.
couldn't afford it. So anyway, but you were asking about my dad. My dad was pretty encouraged. My dad's also this kind of weird Zen guy. He didn't really ever push anything on me. He would just kind of like, when I would go and stay with him on the weekends or whatever, he'd be like, "So we're going to go to a show," and there would be like a free concert at Grant Park in Chicago. All summer they would do these free concerts, and we just go to like all of them. And like I was
That's
like
amazing.
8, and we would go and see like I saw Spirit. I saw
Wow.
I saw the band. I saw like so many.
Oh wow.
That's
know,
cool.
Yeah, and it was just like I would just hang out with my dad and go do that. So I don't know that I was really into music. I always was. So it wasn't like something that I don't remember. People will ask like, so how did you get into music? I'm like, I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah, well, you're like a decade younger than we are. So I'm wondering what and I'll say it was probably CDs. Like what were the first few CDs or albums you remember getting for yourself and being like, "Oh, I love this."
So the first one I ever bought was actually a cassette of Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill.
Yeah,
Which
great.
I bought
Awesome.
at a Circuit City in like Niles or something. But the first one I ever owned, I really liked that Genesis song, the way that I walk.
Oh yeah, I can't dance.
Yeah, so I really liked that song, and
Amazing.
I asked my parents for it for Christmas. I was like, I want this record. I want this record. And so it showed. So Christmas morning, I was at my dad's house. My dad got it for me, and it was a long box. So I opened up the wrapping, I opened up the long box, and it was Genesis, "The Way We Walk" or something was the name of it. Neither my dad nor I knew this, but that was the name of a 2-disc set live album as well that came out around the same time.
Wow.
That song wasn't on that record.
That's weird.
So and it was like there were 2 discs that were sold separately, and I got like disc 2 or something, and so it had like old Genesis on it.
Yeah.
So it's
With like Peter Gabriel or
no, it was
Okay.
live with Phil Collins, but
Okay.
they're playing like a set
Old
of like
songs.
I just remember Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which
Yeah,
is
that's
like
a good one.
and I haven't gone back to it, so I might be wrong, but this live version was like 13 minutes long or something.
Oh my God.
And I was 8,
Yeah.
So I was like,
This is not a 3-minute pop song
no,
that I
right.
signed
not
up
ready
for.
this.
Well, it's interesting. Let's camp on Phil Collins here for a minute because
Good.
I've-
Yes.
yeah,
Good choice.
I've noticed some. Thank you. I've noticed something in the last decade or so. Phil Collins takes an inordinate amount of shit from people.
Yes.
Like I feel like
Why?
there's this
It's amazing.
weird popular thing of like, oh, Phil Collins sucks. To me, Phil Collins is great. Like I don't know, why do you think that people sort of turned off Phil Collins?
I think Phil Collins is an interesting thing because, I mean, for starters, he's the 3rd highest selling solo artist from a band, I think, in history. Right. So
Wow.
it's like Paul McCartney, Michael Jackson. I don't remember who. Probably Michael Jackson, Paul McCartney, and then Phil Collins. Right.
Wow.
I don't know if Beyonce's surpassed him by now. I don't remember, but like last time I read it, that was the thing.
Yeah.
So like you got to consider like he was massive in
Huge.
Like
Absolutely.
oversaturation, maybe.
totally. And I think that's probably Janice. I think that's probably.
Can I give a what I think is the real answer? It's because he's bald. And
Hey, listen.
it's acceptable. Like, it's just like this fool. Like, if he looked, like Jacob Elordi or something, it would be like, well, he's, what a gifted artist. Because he's a bald doof, everyone just tees off on him.
That's where they keep the art. It's like Samson. It's
Yeah, so
keep it in your hair.
because people like, it's very strange. Like, when you think of an 8-year-old into Phil Collins now, right? Like, Phil Collins was viewed. I mean, in his videos, he's portrayed as like a stud.
Yeah, cool guy.
Yeah.
But then you look at him now, and you would go like, that guy had the nerve to think he was a stud. But like, we didn't have an internet. Like, we didn't know that wasn't.
Right.
Well,
right.
I also I don't know how tall he is. I'm very short. I'm an incredibly short man, and he looks very short.
Yeah.
And so in videos he would have it was the 80s, so you had the big, big shoulder. So it like really accentuated it too,
Yeah.
And so, but I think really there was a great article, I think it was in Cracked like 10 years ago or something. And it was like, growing up is realizing that you're probably more like Billy Joel than David Bowie. Right. And and it was like, where like you could be really good at your thing. You could be like amazing at your thing, but like, David Bowie was inherently cool. He had this like innate coolness or whatever. Yeah. Whereas like Billy Joel like is cool. I'm not saying he's not cool. I'm saying that there's like, it's not like Billy Joel walks into the room and you're like, who is this? Like in the way that David Bowie had that, where it's like, whoever you are probably more likely to be that, right?
Right.
And I feel like Phil Collins is like that, where he's like the most successful version, like, where he's just amazing at the thing he does, right?
Can I like put a theory forward? So I think what you're saying is that there are people who, if you didn't know Billy Joel was Billy Joel and could play the Billy Joel songs and had crafted them, you would look at him and think, what a schlub. But David Bowie would walk in and he would command the room if you had no idea he was a musician because of his looks.
Well, I don't necessarily want to say, but I don't want to say the schlub thing, because I know which category I fall in. So I'm not necessarily going to say Billy Joel's schlub. More that Billy Joel is, the thing that commands attention about him is he's an amazing pianist and an amazing songwriter and whatever. So that's the thing that
right.
That walks in the room. David Bowie, he would just look at you or something, and it was like, whoa.
He's electric. He's electric.
Yeah. He really is.
It's funny that you skipped from Phil Collins right to Billy Joel, because these are two people, and I know we love Billy Joel, and I saw Billy Joel last year when he came to SoFi, and he had Stevie Nicks was opening.
Oh, cool.
And so that was a really fun show, but a very interesting thing played out that I think speaks to Goldie's schlub remark and sort of our theories about Bowie versus Joel. So during Stevie Nicks' set, Billy Joel comes out to do one song with her. And then the same thing happens during Billy Joel's set. Stevie Nicks comes out to join him for a song. Here's the thing. So Stevie Nicks, was the epitome of cool. When Fleetwood Mac was at the top of their game, she was the hottest. She was cool. She had a great voice. The band was cool. Billy Joel was never cool in that way. He has great songs. So there was this interesting dynamic. Like when Stevie Nicks came out with Billy Joel, everybody's applauding. And Billy Joel goes over to like really gets into her personal space to give her like a big hug. She wanted no part of it. You could read that body language from up in the crowd. And the same thing happened during Billy Joel's set when Stevie Nicks came back. He went in for another hug, and she was just like, "Hey, you're not the cool kid in class. And I'm still the cool kid." So it is. Do you notice that those politics in music, like if you're on tour with a bunch of different bands and you're like, "Oh, this guy is the fucking cool alpha."
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny because I feel like I definitely relate more to the talent gets you there than being cool thing. Right. I am not cool. I was never cool. The band is really funny because Fall Out Boy has been at various times pretty successful. Yeah. But I don't know if it's I don't know if it's humility or obliviousness. I don't know, but I'm not really good at internalizing that or something. I don't know. Like, and I don't know, but I'm never cool. I've never been cool. And so it's weird because as I'm doing scoring now, I'm doing a lot of scoring, and it's interesting because I'll talk to my friends who are composers, and they're doing some elevated horror film, or they're doing some period piece, or this really interesting kind of surrealistic series or something for streaming. And I do kid shows, and like
Right.
and that's not to denigrate it at all. It's awesome, but it's like you kind of know who you are,
Right.
Like,
Well, we have a version of that with comedy is sort of looked down upon by
yeah, which I never
quote
understand.
real writers,
Is that true?
and I get
Gosh,
it.
I didn't know
You
that.
know,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like if I just took the jokes out of my writing, then I'd be like 90% of the way there.
Yes,
Yes.
totally.
Like I always, my joke is like when you're in a drama room, how do you know when you're done? When everyone's like, well, that's not funny at all. It's really good.
We got it.
Comedy, by the way, is the thing that intimidates me the most. Comedians intimidate me the most. It's one of those things where I don't get really starstruck around anybody, in terms of like rock stars or whatever. But comedians freak me out because it's like it's so neat to be funny. Like it's so impressive to be funny. I remember this one time I was standing behind Patton Oswalt at a parking garage. Now we had done some Fall Out Boy had done some award show or something, and Patton was one of the hosts or something, right? We really didn't have any interaction at that thing, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. But there I am at this parking garage, and I was so like, oh my God, it's Patton Oswalt, right? And I kind of like, he turns around and I'm like, hey, Patton Oswalt, we did that one thing together that one time. I said it. I said the thing. I said the thing that, whatever. And by the way, I think a lot of, dramatic actors where you can really tell when they have it is when they can be funny,
Yeah.
like that's where you're like, oh no,
Yes.
Adam Driver, you're like, oh, you're actually amazing,
Yeah, well, we talk about that a lot on here, when we talk about The Sopranos, which is, we
Mhm.
think, the
Yes.
greatest drama show of all time, but it also happens to be one of the funniest shows. Like, they
Yes,
can
yeah.
be hilarious in that show.
Well, I'm sure you've also been on the other side of the people being intimidated and starstruck. And so I was wondering, I used to be like, oh, I want to get backstage at a show. And then I've been backstage and you realize, oh, I'm just bothering someone I admire. This is not like I'm not going to create a moment, but having been on the other side of that, do you have advice for people who, if they see someone they admire or they have access, how can they help have a good interaction?
Wow, that's a great
I would
question.
just say you're never going to say the thing. You're never going to say the thing you think you're going to say, or whatever. You're always like, what am I going to say? I
Yeah.
saw Stan Lee in walking around in Beverly Hills one time. I had a friend who worked in Beverly Hills, and we were sitting having lunch, and I see Stan Lee go by, and I was like,
Oh God.
and as we established before we started, I'm a massive comics dork.
Yeah.
That's a central part of of me.
Yes.
So Stan Lee goes by, and I'm like, I couldn't imagine anything more. That I was pretty intimidated by.
Yeah.
He comes walking back, and I'm like, I'm going to do it. I never do this. I never
Yes.
go up to people, but I'm like, I'm going to do this. And I walked up to him and I just said, hey, Mr. Lee, thanks, thank you for everything you do. And he shook my hand and he says, thank you, and walked by. But he was obviously in a hurry and he didn't look amped. Like it was one of those things, the interaction was okay, but whatever. And then I look around and I'm like, oh, it's that part of Beverly Hills where it's all hospitals and like doctors' offices.
Oh,
And, like,
yes.
Right.
he was probably going to like,
A proctologist.
whatever, it's like it wasn't a great time for him,
Yeah.
So I guess my thing is more just like be quick because you'll save yourself the thing because you're probably not gonna, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you're not gonna say the thing. You're not
Yep.
gonna say the thing you're thinking of saying.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I nailed it with Tom Brady. This confirms it. I
Yeah.
nailed it when I met Tom Brady. I said, thanks for all the happy Sundays. That was it.
Oh, that's a
that
good one.
is
That was it.
good.
That is
Kind of.
Andy,
you
our
have that-
drummer.
It's fine.
It's good. It's good.
Thank
Andy,
you,
our drummer,
Patrick.
had an amazing one with Harrison Ford. We
Ooh.
were on one of the morning shows. I can't remember which one, and Harrison Ford was there, and they had us take a picture with him, and and none of us could say anything to him. None of us could,
Yeah, of
whatever.
course.
Right.
And he looks over to us and he goes, "So what song you playing?" And Andy goes,
That's good.
"Oh, this song." And he goes, "Was it a hit?" and Andy's like, "Well, we're here, aren't we?" And he's like, "All right." It was like, it was very
Yeah.
cool. It was like they both cooled each other.
Oh.
And it was like perfect. And I was like, "How did you do that?"
That's so great. Well, so let's go back to your childhood or adolescence. So your musical growing up, you have this inner desire. If there was a piano here, I'd be playing it now. Your dad has sort of filled the house with music. So when and how do you get into like your first band?
So there are like two really big important things for me besides my dad. My dad obviously is huge is a huge influence because he had what I thought was eclectic taste.
Yeah.
That was
Mhm.
already interesting to me. The fact that it was like there was folk and Beach Boys and Beatles and all the stuff that a man his age would have, but then there was jazz, which was weird. It wasn't necessarily a
Yeah.
prerequisite kind of thing. There's that joke in Wayne's World about about rumors coming with every suburban house. We didn't have rumors. I didn't.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things like that was kind of like that was interesting. But for me, the two big things were Batman, 1989's Batman, the Danny Elfman score, and the Prince record.
Yeah.
That was like
Incredible.
really formative for me because
Yeah.
it was this combination of like funk. I had never heard funk before. That was really crazy.
Oh.
But then also Elfman, the scoring stuff like that,
Yeah.
it was like
Great
really
score.
great. And it really, I was really little. I was probably like 5 or 6 or something. And I remember my brother did have a keyboard eventually. I remember sitting there sounding out, the beginning of Batman, the bum, 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 bum,
Yeah.
right? Sounding that out. And
Yeah.
because it was so slow, I could do it with one hand and then do it with the other hand. And I was like, what? Just
I
music
can do
came out.
this.
And so that was something that was always there, that part of it.
Right.
And then I didn't really do anything with music beyond that until high school, middle school. It was just kind of this thing that I was always focused on, and
Taking
playing
lessons or self-taught?
No, I did everything by myself. So then somewhere around like 9 or 10, I had found a pair of drumsticks somewhere in like a cabinet somewhere,
Right.
and I just started hitting on buckets and things, and I started just playing along with the radio and whatever, and so I played drums all day, all the time.
Yeah.
And so that kind of, because of that, when I was like 11 or 12 and you discover punk rock, and it's a thing that you can just do, you don't have
Yeah.
to like, there doesn't require anything else, you just get to do it.
Yeah.
That was kind of like off to the races. And the thing that's weird is that I don't know that I'm like the most punk rock dude. Like I mean I am on some level, in terms of like there's a lot of like, I like punk rock and I like a lot of the things they say, that bands have to say and stuff, but I also always had this weird kind of like half in half out thing with it, where it was like I really loved punk rock, and I was really I was at all the shows, and I was in this scene of punk rockers, but I would also then go home and put on Shostakovich or Herbie Hancock or whatever,
Right.
something very. I remember I was in this band and I put on Weather Report in the car one time,
Rad.
and it was like it went over real bad. So
That's
Well,
awesome.
So-
can I ask you, because as someone who's like
Yeah.
always trying to improve in music, did you then learn theory after, or were you just in your head like you can hear intervals really well and that allows you to then find, like, when you hear stuff your ear is very good, or your ear developed as you were doing this? Like, what was your approach and how did you have success?
I think I got really lucky in that my biggest talent was probably my ear, that I was able to pick out melodies and rhythms in a way that a lot of my friends couldn't. And it was weird because that's always moved faster than the rest of me. Like I couldn't. It was really frustrating trying to learn how to write music, how to like physically write it, because this was so much fast. Like the sense that I had for it was much faster than my like the writing it out felt like math, where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is
Of
confusing.
course.
But then
It literally is.
but then I, what's that? Sorry.
I said it literally is like math, because
Yeah.
you're trying to put it into these symbols, what
Yeah,
you're
and then
hearing.
you have to, and then you're breaking down into subdivisions, and
Yeah.
you're going, okay, so that's a 16th, and then if I'm swinging it, then I'm moving this over, like whatever.
Yeah.
There were so many different confusing things where I'm like, I don't know, let me just play it. It
Yes.
just made it faster. It made it so I just kind of would, I don't know, I would figure stuff out. So it's one of those things where, for me, the music theory thing was kind of, to answer your question, Goldie. Sorry, I kind of veered off it, but I just kind of landed on it because it was kind of like you kind of intuit certain, I mean, it's probably not that different than comedy. Like I did UCB, a couple of UCB classes for a while, and you learn the game, you learn the different games and stuff, and whatever, and in comedy, and it's kind of similar where it's like you probably, after you do it, you're like, oh, I did notice that. I've after, if you watch a lot of comedy and you watch improv, you're like, oh, that's the word for what they're doing, but you kind of assumed, or you kind of understood on some level.
Right.
It's kind of
Yeah.
like that, where like musically, I would kind of go like, oh, that's what they're doing when they do this. You add this note, you suspend this note over this chord, and it does this effect, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's cool. You brought up Danny Elfman, and of course that Batman score is fantastic. And
Who
whenever
is-
I hear those
You know,
notes,
he does not know theory, by the way. Danny Elfman.
Danny Elfman.
He doesn't know theory.
Well, that was, it was that was I met Mark Mothersbaugh one time, and I was kind of just picking his brain, and I was like, because I score, and not like those guys, but I score.
Yeah, kid shows.
Yeah, yeah, and, just kid shows. No, I mean, it's a big. It's amazing to get to do it. I'm not putting it down, but but I was kind of like, how do you do it? And I asked them. I asked them about orchestration and music theory, and he's like, you don't really have to know that. And then at some point, I asked him about modular synthesizers, and I think by this point he was getting. I mean, he's very cool to me, but I think he was getting kind of like annoyed, like, okay,
Enough questions.
And he
You had
goes,
your time.
yeah, he's like, oh, you'll never make it in this business if you don't learn about modular synthesizers. It's kind
Is
of like,
that true?
He's kind of
Is
like,
that what he said?
very sarcastically, like,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you've said enough. Like,
Yeah.
that's it's funny because you bring up Danny Elfman, great Batman score, so many great scores. You bring up Mark Mothersbaugh, and these are people along with Trent Reznor and Johnny Greenwood who are in successful pop bands and then have pivoted very successfully to scoring, composing, all that stuff. Are those people like, do you aspire to that kind of a transition in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I scoring was always, composition was always the thing I wanted to do. It was, I mean, literally, there were two things I wanted to do as a kid. I either wanted to do, I wanted to score movies, or I wanted to do funny voices. That was pretty much it,
Right.
And singing in a band really came out of the funny voices. I didn't know I could sing. It was just another impersonation for me. I would kind of do voices around the house and stuff, and and so singing was just, for a few years it was just me impersonating other bands, because like whatever, that was just
Who were you impersonating?
Yeah.
Oh, I would do all sorts of stuff. I did Elvis Costello, and I did Sting, and I did Ray Charles, and I would do AC/DC, and I would do Frank Sinatra. I would just do all these
Wow.
singing impressions, but then I would also do a lot of, I was really obsessed with Saturday Night Live. And so I would also do any of the impressions they would do, and I would learn
Right.
all the, I would try to do all the Phil Hartman stuff or the Dana Carvey stuff. Anyway, so
Yeah.
that was one facet of it, but then the scoring was like always there. That was like the main thing. So when I started the band, it's funny because usually singers in bands, they have their inner turmoil that they want to share, or they have
Yeah.
their, their journal. That I didn't have any of that. I just wanted to compose music, and I didn't know anything about how to get into film or anything, so writing music for a band was the, as close as I could get, I thought.
Yeah.
And then I was doing I actually, through voices, I had done some voices on this movie, Gnome Alone, and
No.
um I kind of bluffed my way into scoring the Hulk ride at Universal Orlando.
Wow.
What? Awesome.
And so Gnome Alone had heard that. And one of the producers, I'm in the vocal booth, doing these gnomes, doing these little gnome guys, and they one of the producers comes in, they go, "Hey, I heard you score," and I go, "Yeah," and they go,
With chicks.
"Yeah," and they go, "Yeah, totally." They go, "Would you like to score this movie?" And I was like, and which that's not usually how it goes down. But I was like, sure, I'll see if I can, schedule it in, but but from there, that's just kind of off to the races, and that's kind of been every day since then. I've been working on something. So
can we go back to the lead singer torment for a second? Because
yeah, sure.
I was in like a college band, and we had this singer, and his name was Alex Dust, and he wore sunglasses.
Cool name.
And he wasn't very vocally gifted, but it was always like, Alex doesn't want to rehearse, and he's locked himself in the bathroom. I mean, it was nothing at stake, right? But it was like literally like he was Axl Rose. Did you ever feel any pressure to do that, or were you ever like, God, I should just act out, and it would actually help me in this situation?
I feel like I didn't really accept that I was the singer for years, because I was kind of like, for a really long time, for many, many years, I was kind of holding out for us to find somebody that I was going to be like. I really thought I would be like, the guitar player that sings harmonies or something. That's kind of what I expected to do. I didn't really plan on being the singer. So, we had a couple albums out, and I was still kind of like pitching guys. I'd be, to the band, I'd be like, "Hey, what about this guy?" And they're like, "I don't know, man. You're kind of you sing for the band at this point."
But didn't you start as the drummer in the band?
No, well, so I didn't actually start as the drummer. I had only ever played drums in bands before this one, and I was auditioning kind of. So Pete and Joe were putting together a band, and they needed a drummer, a guitar player, or a singer, or in some combination. And I was like, I could do one of those, but I knew that meant that I was going to play drums, because I'd only ever played drums.
Yeah.
And the thing was, I was substantially better at drums than I was at anything else, So,
So
I
you
knew that
thought.
I would. What's that?
So you thought.
Yeah, well, singing was never, singing in punk rock. I was in more decidedly punk bands prior to this, and my voice wasn't really a good thing in those bands, because
Wow.
one of those things where I would sing, there was a band, Hot Water Music, and they had these really gruff voices, and everybody wanted to sound like that. Or there were these bands like Blood Brothers and Satia and whatever, it was like really screaming and whatever, and or kind of yelling and whatever. And so I would do those voices, kind of like trying to back up, for our singers or whatever. And at some point it would always veer into my actual voice, and they'd be like,
Yeah.
it's too pretty, And so I didn't really think I never really thought of it as a thing. It just kind of was like, whatever. And I go to show them some songs that I had written, and, trying to pitch the song, because that was the thing I really cared about.
Yeah.
And they go, "Oh, you should sing." And I was like, "Okay, but, was the song okay?"
What about my song?
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Well, it's funny that you bring that up, that, at that time, there were these other bands, and punk rock wanted to sound like those bands. And I feel like was it interesting for you at the point in your career when other bands were trying to sound like you?
Yes.
The weirdest thing about it is that I didn't notice. I'd done an interview for a book, like a kind of oral history on emo, whatever. And someone sent me a copy, and I was reading the thing. And one of the things that I didn't really notice at the time, is when other people are recounting it, the idea that there was a kind of sound, and that we were part of it at the time.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I was kind of literally when we wrote the record that was kind of like the big one in that era. I sat down and I told my parents, I'll do this and just let me fail at this and then I'll go to college. It's kind of
That's
like,
amazing.
so the thing of like bands sounding like us, it's also one of those things where I think it's really interesting. So I used to but before I worked at Sam Goody, I also worked at a used record store. And one of the things about the used record store that was really interesting is that you get really acquainted with failure because that's what people let go of. That's what people sell off.
Yeah.
So we didn't have any copies of the record with the hit on it. We would always have like 20 copies of the record after that one.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I kind of assumed that was where this was going to go. After we put
Yeah.
out the first record, I was like, okay, well, naturally, there was this great ska band in Chicago, sort of ska, sort of almost prog, real crazy, called the Blue Meanies, and I loved them. And they had this amazing record, Full Throttle. And then they got signed to the major label. They put out the major label record, just
Yeah.
just disappeared.
Yeah.
That's what I assumed was
Fall Out
life.
Boys.
I just want to
Well,
point out
everything.
that what
Oh,
you
yeah.
just said about the used record store and you becoming very acquainted with failure, that speech would be so great in a movie, in the right
Yes.
movie.
Yeah.
A character.
It was so good.
I mean, that's a terrific character speech of someone who's quietly and inadvertently studied failure
Yeah, well,
Yes.
and knows
pretty good
everything
home,
about
yeah.
it. I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah, that definitely
deep.
hit home. And now, so let's talk for a minute because I think in the history of rock and roll, I put the name Fall Out Boy in the top 10 of all bands. Like I think it's a fucking fantastic name. And obviously, for those of us who are in comedy in this world, we know that comes from The Simpsons. So
Chappelle.
who are the big Simpsons fans in the band? I mean, it sounds like you probably are as a fan of comedy.
Yeah, well, myself and Joe, who is also a huge fan of comedy, he and Brian Posehn have done a bunch of stuff together. I think they have a comic book maybe, or I don't know. They've done a bunch of stuff. But Joe has. Here's the thing. I'm like a comedy like nerd that like just I nerd out about comedy and stuff. Joe like kind of is a comedian that happened to end up in a band,
Right.
Right.
and so he's actually cool and can actually hang out with comedians. Like I still, it's funny, I told that story about Patton Oswalt. I think like Joe hangs out with him like regularly, like whatever. It's like
Right.
he doesn't have the same freak out that I have. But yeah, so he and I actually, that was a big thing that we bonded on when we started the band, was that both of us were deep Simpsons people. And we had a drummer, actually. Our first drummer was like obsessed with The Simpsons, had like a wall of Simpsons memorabilia.
Right.
And
Amazing.
so he had kind of mentioned, we had thrown out a bunch of names, and I don't remember for sure if that was one of his names, the first drummer, but it ended up on the cutting room floor. We didn't pick it. But then one of our friends, actually this band, Rise Against, Tim from Rise Against, he had another band. We were opening for them. And he was like, he had heard about Fall Out Boy as one of the names. And he was like, that's your name. I don't like your other names.
Oh, great. Way to go, Tim.
And we're like, no, I don't know. We don't like that one. He's like, no, it's going to be your name. And so we played that show, and he was like, I want to thank Fall Out Boy. And that was it. And then it just kind of stuck,
What were you before you decided?
Remember.
Oh, you don't start it.
I don't remember. And the thing is that people were kind of shouting it out too in the crowd. There were like 15 people there, but it was like, you should be Fall Out Boy. He's like, yeah, you should be Fall Out Boy. Fall Out Boy, thank you. And
It stuck. That's awesome.
What an amazing origin story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now, because Fall Out Boy, I mean, not only is it a cool name for, if you're a Simpsons fan, it makes you kind of chuckle, but also it is the perfect name for you guys to tour forever, because it's just one of those names where it lands with everybody. Like even if people are not familiar with your songs or the genre necessarily, they see the name and they're like, oh yeah. Yes, I've heard of them. Yes, that checks.
Yeah.
And so it just seems like it can be on any poster for the next like 30 years if you guys want to.
So it's so weird. I don't know. I mean, it's all surreal to me. I kind of, like I said, I think there's I'll never be cool. Even in my own head, I'll never be cool. So it'll never
Yeah.
track for me. That like it feels very silly sometimes. We did this show a couple months ago with the Foo Fighters, and Public Enemy was there, and
Yeah.
whatever. And so and then we played, and
The
the
way
thing that
you
was
said
really what's that?
I said the way you said that. And
Yeah,
then
but it
we
was
played.
crazy. I mean, like,
Yeah.
why would anyone do that? Like it just seems so improbable and weird and surreal. But
Well,
Yeah.
Are you
it's,
just constantly it sounds like you're constantly dissociating or something.
I guess so. I mean, I don't know. Steve Carell said something one time that somebody asked him about, how, Steve, you seem like not a dick. How did that happen? Because a lot of big, a lot of people in your position would be kind of dicks. And he's like, well, I was kind of like 40 by the time anyone paid attention to me. So like I had some time to like,
Yeah.
build it. I was not. I was like 19, but I've been like 45 since I was like 15. So like
yes.
I think that kind of helped. Whatever.
I think we can relate to that on this
Yeah.
podcast. Well, so now we've talked about, why us, and I can't believe we're playing with these people. When was the moment when you realized that Fall Out Boy, had made it? Like what? Because obviously you talk about you released this album that does really well, but was there a tour? Was there a moment where, like you said with Foo Fighters and Public Enemy, like where you're touring and all of a sudden you're sharing a bill with someone and you're like, oh
A
fuck.
large check, perhaps.
Well, no, because the thing about the large checks, I'm in a weird. Sorry, it's a side tangent, but
No, please.
I'm just old enough that we saw the tail end of the record industry where they would give they'd give everybody a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the thing you don't realize when you're 19 is that money, that's a loan, and that's forever.
Recoupable. Yeah.
So if they give you $2 million and you're like, wow, that's $2 million. That's all. If you only earn, if you only make, 30,000 a year off of being in a band, you're still paying back $2 million. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
It's
not
crazy.
$2 million. Like it's
It's
you
fake.
just took out a big loan. You didn't realize.
I didn't know that.
That's
Yeah, I mean,
so is there interest?
there's not interest, but but the
Okay.
thing, but what they can do is that, depending on how your contract's written, you basically don't get to ever put out another record until you pay that off. Like, like if they don't want, if they decide that,
Yeah.
if you're a little band and I mean, this is the way it was anyway. If you're a little band and you sign a contract and they give you this big record advance and you're like, wow, gee, look at this,
Yeah.
and you go and buy a Lamborghini or something. The problem is that then if you don't generate enough, if your songs aren't really working and they
Yeah.
decide to shelve you, that's it. That
Yeah.
you're done in music pretty much forever. And so, they probably won't go after you for the Lamborghini, but like you will never make another record, like because they own you, and it's their prerogative to say
God.
you're not worth putting
Yeah.
more money into, so you just don't get to put out another record. So anyway, so and my mom is an accountant, and that was one of the ways that I understood this.
Yeah.
Where I
Nice.
was like, so I got that first check, and I was like, wow, what do I get? And she's like, nothing. She's like, hold on to this. Like, don't be stupid, because, this might be all the money you ever get. And for a long time, she was right. So
Wow. You're so
Yeah,
lucky to
good
have
job, Mom.
But I interrupted
no.
it. I feel like what was a good question by Alec, which
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
when you
no,
knew.
just like what was the moment when you realized like, holy fuck, we're sharing the stage with so and so, and
So-
like I can't believe it.
I've
Can I
told
ask-
this story. Sorry, was that
I was
just
going to say, when we met on Warped Tour, we met because this is what I thought. At the time, they choose like basically the biggest band that's on tour at that moment to serve lunch for that week. And that's what you were doing. Do you remember? That's how we met.
we were doing lunch. I don't think it was the biggest band. I think it
I-
was kind of, it was rotating. And if I remember right, we earned that as punishment.
What?
Yeah,
So
I think
this
we
whole time I thought it was for something else.
no, it wasn't
What
because
do you
you're
mean
the biggest band.
punishment?
I think I can't remember what we did wrong, but we did something wrong, and I
Oh,
think that was our
thankfully.
punishment was that we
Wow.
had to do lunch, which I was fine with serving everybody. That wasn't the thing, but it was we had done something, in terms of like I don't remember if we parked in the wrong place or if
Oh my
um
God. That is
we were
hilarious.
out with on that tour. It was Billy Idol and The Offspring. Those were like the headliners,
Yeah.
and so we would show up and it would be like, get your stuff, and whatever. It was really not. It wasn't very glamorous for us.
Right.
But no, I'd say the big moment. I've told this story before, so sorry if this is a canned answer, but it is the moment that I was like, well, this is different. Was we did this show called Skate and Surf Festival, and we did it a few years in a row. But this one year, we do it, and by chance there were like three stages, and one was in a like theater, and another one was in like another space, but then another stage was just kind of in the hallway between the two, in the
Yeah.
corridor between the two. So we were going to start playing, and about 500 people were expected to show up, for us, which, because we were kind of building. So at that point, that was a big crowd for us.
Right.
That would have been a big deal for us to play to 500 people in Jersey. And well, somebody, I think it was the Bouncing Souls, somebody was messing around with a fire extinguisher backstage, and it screwed with the fire alarm. And so they, like,
Evacuated.
security forced everybody to evacuate that one room, the big theater. And it also required the other one to leave. So now everybody's waiting in the corridor, and Skate and Surf, they're like, well, for our stage, they're like, well, your stage is kind of in the open, so you don't have to worry about this. Your show can go on. We don't know this. I don't know any of this. So I go up on stage, and by chance, this never happens, but all of the label came out to see us and everything. At the time, L.A. Reid was the head
Oh,
of
wow.
Island, so he's there, and
Oh my God.
and before we go on stage, he goes, you know, he goes, I got good news and bad news. He goes, the bad news is I like hits. It's like the good news is you got hits. Okay? And I'm like, okay, I don't know. I'm 20 and this sounds,
Feels
I'm
like
terrified.
neutral news and good news.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. You liking hits is not bad news.
Yeah. Well, and so that's like right before we go up. We go up and we would do this thing where we high five before we start. And because of the nature of where I stand, I always have my back turned, so I couldn't see anything. So I go up and we high five, and then I turn around, and now there's 5,000 people there.
Wow.
and
Wow.
and the thing that was weird was that, most of them didn't know who we were. Most of them, it was kind of an accident. But by this chance of fate, like, we killed it to like 5,000 people in Jersey,
Wow.
and that kind of changed
What year was
trajectory.
this?
Well, I don't remember, 2005, 2004. No, it's about five maybe. Must have
Wow.
been. It was after Cork Tree, I think. But
Wow.
so it was like this thing. So that was kind of a moment where I was like, not necessarily that we made it, but like, this is different than my friends' bands. This is different than like
Yeah.
I said, all the bands that I've been in Chicago, or my friends have been in Chicago. This was something that none of them had experienced, that I didn't have a barometer
Yeah.
for. And so I was like, this is beyond me. I don't know where anything is now.
That's
Yeah.
so cool.
I
That's
love
you
that
know, it's
story.
funny you say like you expected 500 people, and that's a good crowd. I don't think 500 people saw me do stand up in my entire career, like
Well,
spread
stand-up's
over my entire career.
stand-up is a
It's-
terrifying thing. I was thinking the other day about this guy I saw one time at a little stand-up festival and somewhere in LA. And we had gone, me and some friends had gone to see another friend, and we were the only people in the audience. It was like five of us. And so we were there cheering on our friend. But the guy that opened was really funny. I remember he was, I think, from Egypt, and he had a lot of bits about being Egyptian American and stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, that is, and I've done those shows, but I think it's even hard. It must be even more difficult to do as a stand-up, because you're
I totally
just you.
agree.
Like,
Yeah.
But so much of it is that for years that you
Yeah.
become kind of immune to it.
Right.
I think that's part of the thing, the aura of comedy to me, is that I feel like there's a thing that, because I really wanted to be a comedian when I was little, and then the first time I saw someone get heckled, I was like, oh no, never mind.
I know what you mean.
Yeah.
That's great.
You made a way better choice.
Yes,
Yeah.
you did. You did.
So-
Yeah. I want to go back to something that you and we'll wrap it up here soon. You've been very generous this morning. I appreciate it. But first, you talked about this thing which I did not know, that when a record label gives you $2 million, that's a loan, which I think is crazy. I did not know that.
It's called
Like, think
it's
of it as like
recoupable.
I mean, it's not really a loan, but it's
But I get what you're saying. They expect you to pay that back, like
eventually
through
yeah.
record sales.
Yes.
But so my perception as an outsider, and maybe you can clarify this a little bit, is that the record industry for decades and decades was incredibly crooked, and then it just got blown apart by Napster, and now they're finding like new ways to be crooked in this digital age. Like, is that something that, as a musician on the inside, do you kind of look at the industry and you're like, God, all these people are just trying to take our money all the time?
The weirdest thing about the record industry, I think, is that there's really not one size fits all. So when I started, I had this really, because it came from punk rock, I had this very, very specific idea of major labels. For example, I was like, well, major labels are all the assholes.
Yeah.
Then you watch, or you get screwed over. You watch your friends get screwed over, or you get screwed over by indie labels, and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's
It's
whatever.
everywhere.
And,
It's rampant.
yeah, well, and it's not this black and white thing. And weirdly, I've known total assholes and morons at major labels, but then I've also known some really great people, and
Right.
some of the people we worked with for a long time at major labels have been cooler and more reasonable than some of the people I knew in indie labels, so
Yeah.
so that's been interesting. And the thing is that there's not one size fits all. And the thing that I took away from it is the thing that I've taken away from it in the long run is that regardless of where it is, it's really kind of poor business to be a dick, to be exploitative of your artists or whatever, or to be an artist that's exploitative of whatever. It really doesn't. It doesn't pay in the long run. Like we've been very lucky, but I also think that we've probably been lucky in part because we haven't really pissed everybody off. I think
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's part of the thing, and I'm sure it's the same in writing and in comedy and in film and in TV. Like I'm sure that it helps to not be
A
a
dick.
pain to work with.
Yeah, we talk about that a
absolutely.
lot.
Absolutely, it does. All right, well, that's very interesting. And now, so let's, because move over Trent Reznor. Let's talk about Patrick Stump scoring. So you've got some irons in the fire now that you're working on. What kind of stuff can we expect to hear from you coming out?
Well, so the reason I wanted to mention something is that I did a documentary for a buddy of mine that is currently playing right now. Today is the 13th of February. It is playing at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival.
Oh.
Or did it just play yesterday? Shoot. Okay, it's over now. But it played it played the 8th and it played the 12th.
Oh, darn
so-
it. Okay.
So
What's it called? What's the documentary called?
So it's called 76 Days, and it's about a guy that gets lost for 76 days at sea.
Wow.
And he survives, but he's just so interesting. He's like he's so matter of fact about it. And it was really fun to score because he kind of, he's like, yeah, and then a shark, I don't know. Like he just doesn't really, he doesn't, this guy is surviving on rainwater and,
Yeah.
trying to grab fish with his bare hands,
Right.
and
Did you have to create the drama with your music since he
Yeah.
wasn't?
yeah, actually,
It's
that's
like-
exactly it. Is that it put me in this place where I had to, because he has this way of just being so kind of like, whatever. And but then the way that it's directed, the way that my friend Joe directed it, when he does the reenactment stuff, it is very thrilling.
Cool.
So you have to find a balance where it's like it has to be thrilling, but then also not so thrilling that you can't hear this guy be like, yeah, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Can't bury
So
him.
that just came out. I also did
Congratulations.
a movie that I really wish I got to talk about. For some reason, I didn't do any press on it. Merry Little Batman, that came out around Christmas. It's a cartoon holiday movie where Batman has a son Damian, and it's kind of like Home Alone, where Batman is away on Batman business, and then
Amazing.
you know all the villains try and take over the Batcave. So
Can
Oh,
you see
cool.
that anywhere now? Do you
yeah,
know?
that's on Amazon Prime. So
Okay, cool.
Nice.
so, and I do have a soundtrack for that. They put out a soundtrack on streaming and stuff, which I was really excited about.
Oh, cool.
That's
and
awesome.
and then meanwhile, I'm doing Spidey and His Amazing Friends for Disney, which I do
That's
Cool.
awesome.
ongoing forever.
And you also have a
as long
theme
as-
song for that, right?
Yeah, I did the theme song. Yeah, I did the theme song, and then I also do all the music on that show.
That's great.
So that one's fun, and I'll do that as long as they'll have me.
Yeah.
And I'm just wrapping up the first season of a show called Hot Wheels Let's Race
Awesome.
for Netflix. So
Cool.
That's
Well,
animated
that's-
as well?
yeah, it's animated. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's awesome. So it seems like you're getting a real foothold in
That's a lot.
in this world, because that's a lot of stuff. And I mean, is the dream like? I know you love what you're doing. You love scoring, and this is not to minimize like an animated show, because listen, that's where we work. So,
Right,
But,
right.
The animation, I don't know. I mean, the real stuff isn't animation.
but is it something like where you watch There Will Be Blood and you're like, one day?
Well, the thing that's weird for me is that I'm a comic book guy. I like comic books, and I like comedy, and I like sci-fi. So it's like
It's like
there are aptitudes that kind of puts you in. So naturally, I do kind of tend towards animation, or I tend towards superhero stuff, or I tend towards fantasy and action adventure stuff. I've done some kind of elevated horror stuff, and that kind of thing, or it would be cool to do. It'd be really interesting to do a drama, but I've never been asked to do a drama. But yeah, I feel like I wonder if I'll ever end up
Do
there.
that.
I wonder if I'll ever, have a chance to do anything musically where I would get to do something like There Will Be Blood, because it's weird. I think, part of it might be my aptitude, but part of it is also like, you are who you are, and
Yeah.
I've watched way more Marvel movies and way more Family Guy than I've watched, Paul Thomas Anderson movies. I've seen them,
Right.
them, but and I love them, and I love high art, and I feel like I have something I could contribute to it. But at the end of the day, I'm still gonna
Be
gravitate
you.
towards.
Geek out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird. I don't know, but I would love to be doing that for forever. It's something that singing is hard. Singing is very hard.
I don't know if you guys know this, but
Yeah. Singing
tends
is very
to strain your throat a little
Yeah.
bit, right?
yeah, and it's just the whole thing. It takes so much out of you, and sometimes it's physically so demanding. And I like that scoring, I get to express myself, but it's never taxing. Because it's like I have responsibilities, I have kids, I have things to do. But in a vacuum, if I had something to score, I could be doing that nonstop and not run out of things, not run
Yeah.
out of ideas, and not run out of. There's something exciting about that being in a band is different than, because there's a physical component in a band where you're like,
Yeah.
I'm just
to
wiped.
be on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you seem to me like the kind of person who's going to get those opportunities, because as you sort of alluded to even before, like, you're not a dick. Like, you're not a
He's really
diva.
not.
You're
He's
not
a-
one of
the
those
opposite.
people that seems like they're difficult to work with. And certainly in the experiences that we've had at Family Guy working with you, you've been an absolute delight, and you've always
Yes.
nailed it every time. So
Yes.
Well,
I
by the
can-
way, I was gonna say, earlier when you were saying, Colder, when you were saying the thing about like, oh, is it like, is this like the most real job? For me, when I show up to Family Guy, I'm just there for like the table read and then the whatever. I'm not there for like all the stuff. So for me, it's like, oh, this is easy. This
Yeah.
sounds nothing. whatever. It took me it took me half an hour. What are you guys talking about?
Yeah,
So,
totally.
Yeah, well, it's easy for you because you come in and nail it. So
Yeah, that's true.
we appreciate that. And so let me just to recap: 76 Days is the documentary, Spidey and Friends
yeah.
is the show, and Merry Little Batman on Amazon Prime. And of
Yes.
course, Fallout Boy, and you guys are going to be going
Going
back
on
out
tour.
on tour next month.
That sounds
Yeah.
exhausting.
It
Touring.
is. Yeah.
When you're kind of a nerd and you're not going to like party too hard, there's not that much to do on tour when you're not on stage. So scoring is it's great.
Perfect.
It's like
Yeah.
you know,
That's awesome.
So
it beats,
Led Zeppelin, the days of Led Zeppelin touring are over. Where
Yeah.
that was never really for me anyway.
Does your airplane have a fireplace like this?
Led Zeppelin,
Yeah. Well, we had to replace the one.
There was a little problem midair.
I don't know. It was gas. They didn't put gas in there. So
Somebody had a problem with it, and thanks, Sleepy Joe.
Yeah.
Anyway, Patrick, thank you so much for
Yes,
being here
thank you.
today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
JC, thank you for bringing this man into our lives. We
course.
appreciate that. Patrick, you're always awesome on the show, and we can't wait to hear what
Always
you're
glad to
gonna
do it. Always
Love you,
great to see
pal.
you guys.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Patrick.
Have a
Thank
good
you.
one.
You too.